Hello again, it's me again with another talk for you now. Let me just adjust this, there we are. In this video I want to talk more about the anxiety symptoms we all get, describe them in some more detail because I've had most of them in my time, and to relate them both to real events in my own life and to the method for recovery from them that Claire Weekes invented. Now, I think if I start by telling you about my own, you know a bit about my history from my other videos, and you'll also know that I still suffer from anxiety symptoms. However, although I'm not actually fully recovered from those symptoms, I am recovering. I'm actually coming through them. Now, that's probably a question you've asked yourself when you've watched my videos. You probably think this chap knows all about anxiety, he knows all this stuff about fear and what it does, yet apparently he's still suffering from it. And why is that? Why has he not got himself better? So I will explain as I go along. Now, I'll give you an example of what happened to me yesterday, which shows you what it's like, what we normally do, well, to some extent, what we normally do when faced with situations that produce all these anxiety symptoms. And it was a very mundane thing. I just went out for about 3/4 of an hour, go to the post office and go to the supermarket. Nothing spectacular there, just very ordinary, everyday things. Yet in spite of that, I still suffered from quite intense anxiety symptoms. So, to give you some sort of context here, when I woke up yesterday morning, as sometimes happens, just the jolt of waking up startles my nerves. And no more than that, just waking up suddenly. And when my nerves are startled, I get the various symptoms. I get rapid heartbeat, I get my breathing speeds up, and my stomach starts to feel queasy. And as probably you've noticed yourself, if you've suffered from anxiety for a time, mornings are always seem to be the worst time. You seem to be at your most vulnerable then. So whatever fear symptoms you get seem worse in the mornings. It's not always the case, but it happens with a lot of people. I know this for a fact. So what I did, I just got up and I went downstairs, had a cup of tea, and because of what I know, because of what I've learned, I was able to let the feelings simply go on for a time, which is, if you don't stimulate them further by being too upset by the feelings, then they die down by themselves, and that's what happened. However, having had a sort of frightening start, if you like, to my day, it kind of put me in an apprehensive mood anyway. So when it came for me to go out, just do my chores, I started to work myself up again. Now, going to the post office was a 5-minute drive, and I found a parking space opposite. When I parked my car and I got out of the car, as so often happens, the symptoms of fear were present. In my case, it was the swimming head, the very light-headed feeling, blurred vision, almost crossed eyes, almost double vision like that. Very shaky legs. I can feel my heart thumping, which invariably it does. But rather than sort of thinking, I can't do this, instead of just getting into my car and driving back home again, which is what I've done in the past more than once, I decided that no, that's not going to solve anything. I'll just do what I need to do with all this happening. And this is the crucial thing. You're still going to feel afraid, but you're going to do what you need to do with it all happening. That is the key. In spite of how you feel, carry on. So I went to the post office, feeling very strange, very lightheaded, very unreal too, because, as so often happens, my attention was on myself. I was noticing how I was feeling, and when you do that to such a degree that you're focusing intently on how you feel, things around you look weird and unreal, like you're not actually there. It's like some sort of horrible dream. But that's a very basic cause of anxiety, of unreality for many people. So I did what I had to do in there, and I drove the car back down to the supermarket, still feeling, the symptoms I described. And I went into the supermarket and just picked up a few things I needed to buy. And at that point, once I'd finished getting what I needed to get and headed for the checkout, as so often happens, and I'm sure you know this feeling yourself, you start to feel relieved because you think it's nearly over, which means I can get out of this place and go home. And so you start to let yourself go. You start to release all this tension that you're carrying around with you. You start to let it go because you think, well, this ordeal, as it seems to you, is nearly over, and you can head back home to what you consider to be safety. Well, it is safety to you. I mean, that's how it feels to you. You feel safe in your own home. So this is what happened with me. I did pay for my shopping, went home, and still feeling the after effects of the fear. I still felt shaky. My vision was still not quite right as it should be. My stomach was very queasy and churny. So I just came back in and sat down for 10-15 minutes, just to allow my body to sort of calm itself down. Now, that's such an ordinary event, just going and doing a few bits of shopping, basically. Yet it can feel so intense because of this matter of sensitization, which I've talked about before. Now, this bears repeating because it's very important to understand what it actually means. Sensitization, the definition of it, my definition of it is when your nerves are conditioned to react in an exaggerated, intense way, and the feelings that you get come very, very quickly, can come very quickly at the slightest provocation. The littlest thing can set off this reaction of intense fear symptoms. And I think out of all the things that confuse people the most, sensitization is probably one of the main reasons. Is because they don't understand why they feel such an intensity of fear for no obvious reason. There's nothing terribly frightening and dangerous about the situation they're in, which they think can cause them to feel so afraid. So what happens then is that when you try to, in this situation, this is why it's so very hard to get people who are not suffering to understand what your problem is. If you talk about how frightened you're feeling, in their minds they think of it in terms of how they felt when they've been very nervous or frightened by something. But the way they have felt is just regular nervousness and regular fear, just fear at normal intensity. Sensitized fear, on the other hand, is 100 times worse. And when you tell them this, when you say this is how frightened you get, they can't conceive it because they can't relate it to anything they've had themselves. So when you say, I've been very afraid of this, or I'm afraid of that, and I can't do this, I can't do that, they think, why? Why can't you do that? Because to them, it's just regular fear. So this is a major obstacle we have to try and overcome when trying to justify what we do and what we don't do. And it's simply because the non-sufferer doesn't understand. They can't understand. Anyway, that's sensitization. And we keep sensitization going by the way we think about what is happening in our bodies. We are trying very hard to establish some sort of control over these fear symptoms. Indeed, in the beginning, we might not even recognize them as being fear symptoms because of their intensity. And this is what tricks so many people into an anxiety state, because they don't recognize that the basis of these feelings is just plain old fear. Everything is so extreme, and they think, well, how can that possibly be just fear? And this is exactly what happened to me the first time I experienced it. So this sets up a cycle, and I'm sure many of you will have heard of the anxiety cycle. Now, it helps to understand it if you think of acoustic feedback. Now, if you have a microphone and an amplifier and a speaker in close proximity to each other, if sound gets collected by the microphone and goes to the amplifier, the amplified sound comes out the speaker. Now, the microphone, if it's too close to the speaker, will pick up that amplified sound and send it back to the amplifier, so you end up with this awful screeching, whining, horrible noise of acoustic feedback. And that is because the sound is going around and around and around faster and faster, and it's causing this distortion, it's causing this exaggerated noise. And this is precisely what happens with our nervous system. Something triggers this exaggerated, sensitized fear response inside our bodies. So what happens then is that we become afraid of it. A fear thought goes in through our mind, oh no, what is this, what is happening? And that signals to your nervous system, there's a danger here, there's a threat. So what does your nervous system do? It produces even more symptoms. You're telling it to. You're telling it there's a threat and there's a danger to you. So it has to respond. That's what it's there for. It responds to your thoughts. So on come the worst symptoms, on come different symptoms. That comes back to you in the form of, oh my God, now what's happening? You think even more scary thoughts. And that again signals to your nervous system to produce even more fear symptoms. And that's the cycle. It's a feedback loop. You intensify it yourself by what you're telling yourself, basically. And this is why we feel so out of control, because this thing, whatever we're feeling, whatever the symptoms are, they take on a life of their own. They become intense, more and more intense, because of what we're thinking. And we can't control it, so we try all different kinds of tricks, techniques, tactics to try and stop ourselves feeling like this. Like we try to avoid thinking about them. We try to try to forget that they're happening, or we rush around trying to forget, trying to blot it all out of our minds. We do all sorts of things to try and distract ourselves from what is actually physically happening to us. And I'm not talking just here about physical feelings. It's also all the thoughts that are going on at the same time, all the scary, horrible thoughts that come into our minds, thoughts of catastrophe, thoughts of awful things that are about to happen to us. So that's what we normally do. In other words, to put it simply, we fight the way we feel. We fight it and we try and control it. And if this goes on for a period of time, we realize that this fighting is just not working. It's not stopping us feeling this way. So we feel desperate, because we think, well, fighting is what else can I do in this situation? I've got to fight it. I've got to keep control over it, or try to. So that's why this process just keeps on going and going. So Claire Weeks, when she was a medical doctor, she recognized this process in all the patients she used to see, and she realized what the problem was. And her approach was to look at it scientifically and logically, and she realized what these people were doing, and she also saw that by doing the exact opposite of what these people were doing, that was the secret to making it stop. She realized that because your nervous system is an involuntary system, in other words, it works outside of your conscious control and outside of your conscious awareness, you can't control it. You can't just make it stop. You can't switch it off. So she realized that the opposite approach is by taking a passive approach to it. It's an indirect control over it. And this is why she came up with her 4 concepts of facing, accepting, floating, and letting time pass. Now, the way she did, it was absolutely brilliant the way she worked all this out. And at the time she first published her book, which was in 1962, there was nothing like it. And it was revolutionary. And many of her contemporaries didn't believe her and didn't think it was, a viable treatment for anxiety. But time has proven her right. And this is why I want to talk to you a bit more about how you actually apply these principles to various types of anxiety symptom. Now, I talked about it yesterday, and the fact that I didn't actually fully accept and let the feelings be there. I accepted them enough to enable me to do what I needed to do, but there was still a certain amount of tension, still a certain amount of resistance to what was happening. There have been many occasions in the past where I've been able to do that fully. The prime example is the story I told about panic when I was driving. I fully accepted and surrendered to that panic at that time, and it stopped. Now, you can adopt this approach to all the symptoms that you're feeling, not just the physical symptoms. You can take that approach to all the frightening thoughts that go through your head. You can do the same thing. Now, these principles are so simple, but people find them enormously hard to do, or can do, because it just seems to go against what you instinctively feel you should be doing, which is fighting and tensing and resisting it. It feels like that's wrong. And plus the fact that when you decide to be passive in the face of these symptoms, you automatically fear that by doing that, you're actually going to make them worse. You think, oh, I must keep control, I must pull myself together, hold myself together, keep a grip on myself. This is the kind of thinking that goes along with an anxiety state. No, it's that itself which is making it all worse. It's tensing yourself up against all these bodily sensations. It creates a huge amount of tension in your muscles and in every part of you, really. And it creates an enormous amount of fear in your mind, because you think, oh God, if I let go, I'm just going to go to pieces. I'm going to go mad. I'm going to collapse. I'm going to die. Something awful is going to happen. And this is what's initially a lot of people are too scared to try, because of that. That's the fear they have, that things will just run out of control. Now, the paradox here is that it's exactly the opposite that happens if you relinquish control, or the control you think you have. You take the indirect approach, and that is by letting it happen. And this is where we go into the 4 concepts. The facing. Facing means you don't try and ignore or forget about what's happening in your body or in your mind. You face up to it. You face up to the feelings, and you just, as best you are able, allow them to just happen. You're not trying to control them. You're not trying to switch them off or forget about them. You're there and they're happening. This, to many people, when they first hear about this idea, they think, that's impossible. How can I do that? I'm going to show myself up. I'm going to embarrass myself in public, and people are going to see that I'm scared. Any number of thoughts of that kind. You think that's what's going to happen if you try and face and accept. But facing means you are fully aware of what's happening to you. You're not trying to forget about it. You're not rushing around desperately trying to think of something else. You're fully aware of what's happening. And being fully aware of it, once you are conscious of what is actually physically happening to you, you then take this passive accepting approach. You allow all this stuff just to happen. Now, when you do this, this is the key to understanding why this approach works. When you start to do this, you're sending a message to your nervous system. Previously, by fighting and all these frightening thoughts that you've been feeding into your nervous system, you've just wound it up and made it activate even more, made it react even more. By taking this passive approach, by saying, okay, this is what's happening, I'll just let it be there and let it do what it wants to do. You sent a message to your nervous system that the danger that you were previously telling it about, all these symptoms, is not actually a danger at all. It's not a threat in any way. It's just an unpleasant, uncomfortable feeling or feelings that you're getting which are not dangerous. Now, initially, your nervous system might not necessarily believe this because it is your protector. That is its reason to exist. It's there to protect you from danger. If you tell it there's danger, then it's got to do what it's programmed to do, if you like, to protect you. It produces all these symptoms. However, if you tell it the opposite, that, oh no, this is just fear symptoms, no danger here, no threat, I'll let it just happen. Each time you tell this to your nervous system gradually begins to accept that what you're telling it is right. Now, you've got to understand here, this is where sensitization is so important, because it's this hair trigger response that you've got with your feelings, your nervous symptoms. Sensitization exaggerates and magnifies and makes things happen so quickly and instantly and suddenly. So your nervous system is on red alert the whole time, waiting for you to tell it, that there's danger again. Whereas if you're not sensitized, it takes a much more definite threat or a danger to actually trigger the nervous system reaction of fear. So this is why when it's on this red alert state, this very heightened alert state, initially when you start to take the passive approach, it takes time because your nervous system just is erring on the side of caution. It's making really sure that there actually isn't any danger here. So the more you practice, and you keep on practicing, accepting and relaxing towards the feelings, all the time you do this, every time you do this, it sends that message again to the nervous system, which is basically saying, right, you can stand down from this alert you're on. There isn't a danger here. And as time goes on, and the more you do it, the feelings themselves start to die down. It's that simple, although the practice of it is not simple, which I would readily agree. As many of you, if you have tried this, many of you will know this. Now, I think I talked about on my panic video. I described how panic can vanish in an instant, but if you take this total passive approach, and it is true that that does happen, but the same approach works with the other symptoms, although not necessarily so instantly and so dramatically. But the key to it is persistence and understanding. It's understanding what is actually happening to you. And of course, the obvious paradox of all of this is that the thing you're frightened of is fear itself. It's the feelings of fear magnified by sensitization that you're afraid of. So, in other words, there's no real danger here, but you think there is. And so you keep on telling your nervous system more and more and more fear. And so it keeps producing more and more and more symptoms. It's very simple, very logical. Okay, now I know of many people who have recovered using these principles. And I also know there's many like me that are still recovering because they, like me, they can accept a part of what they're feeling in terms of nervous symptoms. But there are certain things they still have a problem with, and I readily admit that I am like that myself. There are two things in particular, like with me it's dizziness. Now, if dizziness gets very bad, then I almost reflexly react by sort of shrinking back from it and think, oh no, not this, what's going to happen? I know perfectly well that through all the times I've felt that in the past, that nothing does happen. It's just, I guess, get more frightened. But I'm still working through that one. I'm still practicing dealing with it until I finally get to a point where I just think, there isn't any danger here. Nothing was ever going to happen. The only thing that's ever happened is I get frightened. And that is what you do with each symptom. The other one with me is what I've talked about before, is fear of vomiting. I fear that, if I get nauseous, I'm going to vomit. And it's just my own particular fear, which I've had all my life. And that too, I have on past occasions, like the panic event I told you about. I was even prepared to let that happen, and on that occasion, though it didn't happen, I was really willing to let it happen. So again, that's another thing that I get, which I'm still working my way through, and I know if I persist in this approach long enough, I will get to a point where I don't care anymore. And that is what you're aiming for. You're aiming to practice these techniques until you no longer care whatever your body throws at you. You just don't care. It doesn't matter anymore. And when you finally feel that and know that, and you'll know it when it happens, and at that point you've basically told your nervous system that there is no more need for all these symptoms, all these things it's doing to you. And that is the point which you have finally lost your fear of fear. That's basically what it is. You lose your fear of fear. Now, many people get into this state, like I said, through a long period of stress, and they start to get all these exaggerated symptoms. Now, what are these symptoms? I've talked briefly about some of them. I've talked about breathing and the problems you have with breathing, like apart from breathing too fast, which is a reflex action of fear, you breathe faster. There's also this tight feeling you get in your chest, where all your chest and abdominal muscles tighten up, and you literally feel like you're gasping for air, you're suffocating. It is only a feeling. You're not in any real danger there, though it feels horrible. It really feels horrible, I admit it. But it's just, you breathing too fast is disturbing the balance of carbon dioxide and oxygen in your bloodstream. And it's your body's attempt to try and slow down your breathing. And that's what it just causes all this tension in your muscles. Palpitations, fast heartbeat. I mean, it's not only just sudden, rapid heartbeat, like you can go from up to 100, 120 or more beats per minute. Palpitations, they can suddenly start up, or you can just have a faster beating heart anyway, because you're in this frightened state. Yet again, it's another one of these symptoms that people fear and dread because they fear what it might do to them. They think, oh my God, my heart's going to give out. I'm going to have a heart attack, something terrible is going to happen to me because it's going to damage my heart. Now, I'm saying this obviously on the assumption that your doctor has told you there is actually nothing wrong with your heart, that everything that you feel as regards your heart is just the effect of fear, of adrenaline. But that's another thing that can really scare people. Dizziness I've talked about, the dizziness that comes from hyperventilation, breathing too fast. Dizziness also arises from disturbances in the coordination between your eyes and your ears and your neck muscles. Tightness in the neck muscles can cause a disturbance in your vision. Your inner ear mechanism, which normally regulates your balance, can be disturbed by all this tension. And so the net effect is to have all this unsteady, swaying, lurching feeling. Occasionally you can get vertigo, which is where things actually appear to revolve around you. I've had that a few times. And that's very unpleasant, I have to admit. And again, that's another thing that can really scare people. Again, because it's exaggerated by sensitization, and because they fear what will happen as a result of it. They fear they might pass out, they might just collapse, just fall over because of their so unsteadiness. They're so unsteady. I mean, that's one of the things that's always been in my mind. I think, oh my God, I'm going to fall over. Never happened, but the fear remains. And of course, there's all the digestive effects. I mean, most of you will have had. Majority of people that suffer anxiety, it affects their digestive system in some way. For many, it's the stomach. It's not just the churning stomach, it's the nauseous stomach. It's the tight stomach, all tightened up in a knot. I mean, it actually makes some people physically sick. This has always been one of my fears, that it would actually do that. It's never done it to me, but it's always been that fear. It affects your bowels. You can get diarrhea, you can get cramps, you can get... Again, it's your body's protective response when you're frightened and you're facing a threat or a danger. The last thing your body needs to be doing is, concentrating on digesting your food. It takes all the blood away from your digestive system and sends it to your muscles and to your arms and legs, which means you've got greater ability to fight. It doesn't matter about digestion at that point. That's why your body switches away from it. And that's why you get all the symptoms. And I mean, that can be very frightening for some people. It certainly has been for me when I've had the real intense feelings. And along with that, you get the lump in the throat, which is globus hystericus, it's called. It's the globus muscle is a muscle in your throat which kind of closes in reaction to fear. And again, it's to stop anything to do with food being dealt with at that time, because you are supposedly in danger. So it closes off your throat, and people feel like they're choking, that they can't swallow, that they're going to gag on their food if they try and eat it. Usually it can be very persistent with some people. I know of people where this has been a real big problem to them, and eating has been a real big problem. It's like all these symptoms, the more attention it gets, the more it persists. And along with that, of course, is the dry mouth, which we all know about. Your mouth goes dry, you can't produce saliva. If you try to eat anything, you can't chew it or swallow it because there's no saliva there, unless you start drinking water with it or something. But again, it's that protective response by your body to stop you doing anything connected with food or eating while you're facing this danger. I'd mentioned weak legs. Now that's another perfectly understandable symptom. Blood pools into your legs because if you're in a threatening situation, you either fight or you run away. You need more blood in your muscles and your legs. That is what your body is doing. It's gearing you up to have either a fight or to actually run away from the situation. So your legs feel like jelly. You feel like they're going to give way. They're going to buckle under you. It's just a fear reaction again, produced by adrenaline. All these effects are produced by adrenaline. And there are other stress hormones involved, but adrenaline is the one that's the key factor. Now, those are kind of acute symptoms that happen, that can come on suddenly. There are longer term symptoms which if you're subject to chronic anxiety over a period of time. Not necessarily the case, but this is what I've found. Things like headaches, where you get a headache every day. It can be in your neck muscles, it could spread up over your head. With me, it used to be in my scalp muscles. It used to be a part of my scalp on one side of my head or the other. All the scalp muscles kind of go into a spasm, and the pain can stay there for hours and hours and hours. And that is a chronic symptom, more usually. Although you can get a headache come on suddenly, during a sudden, like a panic attack. I've had that happen plenty of times. A sudden headache comes on. But in all these things, there's three elements. There's the exaggeration of sensitization, giving you a much worse symptom than you otherwise would have got. There's your exaggerated reaction to them because you're in a frightened state of mind, where you fear what might happen, and all this flood of frightening thoughts that go through your mind when these things happen. There's that. And then there's the third bit where you keep the cycle going by adding to the fear. The thoughts feed into your nervous system and back round again, this feedback loop I keep talking about. And this is why it is so long-lasting, so persistent, until you start to break this cycle down by using Claire Weekes' techniques. Now, I mentioned facing and accepting. Floating is a very good word to try and describe the passive approach you take to the way you feel, as opposed to the fighting approach. You float, you let it all go, you sag towards it, you relax towards it. There are lots of different ways of describing this passive approach, but that is the idea of floating, just letting it happen. And the last thing, letting time pass, is what I described earlier. You need to allow time to pass for your nervous system to get the message from you that the threat is not real, there's no real danger here, and for your nervous system to desensitize. And this is what happens by being persistent in letting these feelings come as much as you're able to. And as I described, it's not something you can do all the time, as what happened to me yesterday is an example of. Letting time pass means you will give as much time as you need to getting out of this cycle of fear. Now, when people first start off doing this, they find it hard, because instinctively it feels they're doing the wrong thing. They feel that they must tighten up and tense, and many people feel disheartened and they want to give up at that point because they don't see it as working for them. They don't feel any different in themselves. And this is the letting time pass, obviously, to give time for the approach to work. Now, what happened in my case, and what is the usual happening, is to actually experience for yourself a lessening of the symptoms, or whatever they are, in direct relation to however much acceptance you can manage. And this is a process Claire Weekes used to call glimpsing. It's just seeing for yourself the direct effect that acceptance has on the way you feel. Now, when you feel a change in yourself, and you feel that the symptoms that have been scaring you for so long start suddenly to, well, not suddenly, or gradually, it can be suddenly, when they decrease as a direct result of you taking this accepting attitude, you think, it did work. I do feel better. And I keep talking about this panic thing that I had. That is what happened with me. I took a direct passive approach, and the panic went just like that. Now, with other symptoms, the same thing applies, but it takes a bit longer in most cases. But when you do experience that for yourself, when you see panic and fear die down, just by you letting it yourself go passive, you think, yes, here's something that actually works. And this is what starts to build up your confidence in this method. You have to have the experience of it. You could read all about it, you could understand it, but it's only in the doing of it that you gain the valuable experience that you need. And when you first have these glimpses of what this approach can do for you, it's the most marvelous feeling, because at long last you think, here is really something that's going to help me. It's going to work. And obviously your doubts remain, and you need more time to pass. You need more experience of using this method. But that first time you glimpse the possibilities here, and when you've had more practice, you start to feel this. It's a wonderful feeling, because you think, at long last, I've got something I can do about it. And the possibilities of what your life could be after. I mean, when you're in a state of anxiety, the future looks horrible, and you just don't want to think about it, really. Because all you see it is in terms of feeling like this forever and ever, and that's the way it feels. You think, I'm never going to get over this. It's never going to stop. This is my life from now on. This is how it feels to you. But when you start to have these little glimpses of the possibilities of what this approach can do for you, then you think, well, maybe I will be able to get my life back. Maybe I will be able to do all these things I want to do. And it's a wonderful feeling. It's an absolutely wonderful feeling, because for the first time in possibly years, you feel hope again. You feel you've got something to aim at, something that really means something. You've got a future again. It's absolutely wonderful when you feel like that. And it compensates you, I think, for all the suffering you've been through, because I know living like this is hell. There's no, that's a good way to describe it. It's living hell. It's like some awful, endless nightmare that never, ever stops. But when you have these wonderful glimpses of possibilities, you think, wow, there is a way out. There really is a way out. So this is what I wanted to, give you that message again, and to show you how you can apply it to all these different feelings that you get. And I think in the next talk I'm going to talk more about the frightening thoughts, because that to many people is worse than the physical symptoms. And I do understand that, because I know that myself. But for now, I think learning to apply this idea to how you feel physically, just to let it be there. And you've got to have this understanding. You've got to really appreciate what is happening to you in your body, understand what it means and why it's happening. This is what Claire Weekes took a lot of trouble to explain in her books. It's having that understanding, and then doing it, then doing what the method says you should do. So really, I'm going to talk a lot more about this, because although I end up repeating what I've said in previous talks, you need to hear these things repeatedly, because your mind is tired, your body is tired, you're worn out from all this fear. And taking in information that can be hard, concentrating, remembering difficult, things like that. I'm going to talk about that more on the next recording. I'm basically following the pattern that Claire Weekes took when her recording. She talked about physical symptoms, and she talked about all the mental experiences that you can have. But just to end this recording, I want to say that whatever state you're in now, however frightened you are, and however long you've been like it, this way will get you out of it if you do it. It's guaranteed. It's a proven technique which many people have used and recovered from their nerves, from their anxiety. You have to put your faith in it and trust it, and when you do that, you'll see it work in your own life, and it'll be marvelous when you see it work. Hold on to that thought. This is the way out. So until I talk to you on the next recording about all the strange thoughts, etc., thank you very much for watching, and I'll talk to you again.